The invitation arrived like a grenade, sleek and elegant in its cream envelope, but explosive in its intent. Kyle stared at the embossed gold lettering, Nathaniel James Carter and Olivia Grace Whitmore. Request the honor of your presence, and felt his stomach lurch, as if the ground beneath his Brooklyn apartment had cracked open. His ex, Nate, was getting married, and Kyle was invited to witness the love he'd lost parade down the aisle. He tossed the card onto the coffee table, where it landed beside a half-empty coffee mug and a stack of unpaid bills. 2 years ago, Nate had walked out, leaving Kyle with a broken heart and a lease he could barely afford. Now, Nate was marrying Olivia, the poised heiress who'd swept him away with her Upper East Side charm. The thought of attending alone, of facing Nate's pitying glance or the whispers of mutual friends, made Kyle's skin crawl. He needed a plan, a shield, something to prove he'd moved on, better, stronger, happier. That's when he called Ezra. Ezra Bennett was a wildfire of a man, all sharp wit and effortless charisma. The kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd been waiting for him. They'd met 6 months ago at a Greenwich Village art gallery, where Ezra's bold laugh and piercing blue eyes had caught Kyle off guard. He was an illustrator, freelancing for indie comics, with a knack for turning chaos into beauty. They become fast friends, bonding over late-night tacos and shared cynicism about New York's dating scene. But Ezra was also openly gay, unapologetically himself, and Kyle, still navigating the edges of his own identity, found that magnetic. "Fake date me," Kyle blurted over the phone, pacing his cramped living room. "Nate's wedding is in 2 weeks, and I can't show up looking like the sad ex who never got over him. I need you to be my +1. You know, arm candy. Charm his socks off everyone. Make it look real." Ezra's laugh crackled through the speaker, rich and teasing. "Kyle, you're asking me to play your boyfriend for a weekend? That's a plot twist, even M. Night Shyamalan couldn't dream up. What's in it for me? Free food, open bar, and the chance to mess with my ex's head," Kyle said, grinning despite himself. "Come on. Easy. You're the only one I trust to pull this off." There was a pause. Then Ezra's voice softened, a playful edge still lingering. "All right, I'm in. But if we're doing this, we're going all out. Pet names, hand-holding, the whole rom-com package." "Deal, deal," Kyle said, his pulse quickening at the thought. He hung up, ignoring the flutter in his chest, chalking up to nerves. This was just a performance, a way to save face. Nothing more. The wedding was in the Hamptons, a sprawling estate draped in white roses and fairy lights, the kind of place that screamed old money and new promises. Kyle and Ezra arrived in a rented convertible, the ocean breeze tousling their hair. Kyle wore a tailored gray suit that hugged his lean frame, his dark hair swept back, hazel eyes sharp with determination. Ezra, in a deep burgundy suit that made his blonde hair glow, looked like he'd stepped out of fashion editorial. They were a vision, and they knew it. As they stepped onto the lawn, Kyle felt every eye on them. Nate's college friends, the ones who'd watched their relationship implode, whispered behind champagne flutes. Olivia's family, stiff in their designer dresses, raised eyebrows. Kyle slipped his hand into Ezra's, their fingers interlocking with a practiced ease they'd rehearsed over coffee the week before. Ezra squeezed back, his thumb brushing Kyle's knuckles, and for a moment, the world felt steady. "You're doing great, babe," Ezra murmured, leaning close enough for his breath to tickle Kyle's ear. The pet name sent a jolt through him, but Kyle played along, flashing a smile that felt more real than he'd expected. They mingled, Ezra charming everyone with stories of his latest comic project, his hand never leaving Kyle's arm or waist. When Nate finally appeared, tall and polished in a black tux, Kyle's heart stuttered. Nate's eyes flicked to Ezra, then back to Kyle, a flicker of something, jealousy, regret, crossing his face. "Kyle," Nate said, his voice smooth but guarded. "You look good." "This must be Ezra," Kyle said, his tone steady. "My boyfriend." Ezra extended a hand, his grin sharp enough to cut glass. "Pleasure to meet you, Nate. Heard a lot about you." The lie was seamless, and Kyle bit back a laugh. The night unfolded like a dream. They danced under the stars, Ezra's hand firm on Kyle's lower back, their bodies swaying to a slow jazz number. They stole glances, laughed at private jokes, and when Ezra pressed a soft kiss to Kyle's temple during a toast, the crowd cooed. Kyle's chest tightened, not from nerves, but from something warmer, something he wasn't ready to name. By the time the cake was cut, Kyle had almost forgotten this was a charade. Ezra's arm around his shoulders felt natural, his laughter a tether in the chaos of the night. But as they drove back to their hotel, the silence between them grew heavy. Kyle stared out the window, the ocean a dark blur, wondering why his heart ached when everything had gone so perfectly. The hotel room was too quiet, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound breaking the stillness. Kyle sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, his tie loosened, his jacket slung over a chair. Ezra leaned against the window, his silhouette framed by the moonlight spilling over the Hamptons coastline. The weight of the night clung to them, unspoken questions hanging in the air like smoke. "You were a natural out there," Ezra said, breaking the silence. His voice was light, but his eyes were searching, studying Kyle with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Almost believed we were the real deal." Kyle laughed, but it came out shaky. "You're too good at this." Half the room was in love with you by the end of the night. He meant it as a joke, but the truth of it stung. Ezra had been flawless, attentive, witty, the perfect partner. And Kyle had felt it, too, the pull of something deeper every time their eyes met. Ezra crossed the room, sitting beside him on the bed. "You held your own. You know." Nate couldn't stop looking at us. "Mission accomplished, right?" He nudged Kyle's shoulder, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah," Kyle said, staring at his hands. "Mission accomplished," but the words fell hollow. The wedding was supposed to be closure, a way to prove he was over Nate. So why did he feel like he'd open a door he couldn't close? They stayed up late, splitting a bottle of cheap wine from the hotel minibar, trading stories about the night. Ezra mimicked Olivia's aunt's snooty accent, making Kyle laugh until his sides hurt. But when the conversation lulled, Ezra's hand brushed Kyle's, lingering just long enough to send a spark through him. Kyle pulled away, blaming the wine, but his heart pounded. The next morning, they drove back to Brooklyn, the charade supposedly over. But when Ezra dropped Kyle off at his apartment, he lingered in the driver's seat, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes serious. Back to being just friends? Kyle's throat tightened. He wanted to say yes, to keep things simple, but the memory of Ezra's hand in his, the warmth of his kiss on his temple, wouldn't let go. Yeah, he said finally, forcing a smile. Just friends, but it wasn't that easy. Over the next week, Kyle couldn't shake Ezra from his mind. They met for coffee, like always, but every glance felt charged, every laugh too intimate. When Ezra texted him a meme about bad wedding DJs, Kyle's heart leapt, and he hated himself for it. This was supposed to be a game, a one-night act. So why did it feel like the curtain hadn't fallen? New York City had a way of making secrets feel louder. Kyle walked through Prospect Park, the autumn leaves crunching under his boots, trying to outrun the confusion swirling in his chest. Ezra had texted him that morning, suggesting a walk, and now they were side by side, their shoulders brushing as they navigated the crowded paths. "You've been quiet," Ezra said, his voice gentle but probing. He wore a black leather jacket and a scarf that made his blue eyes pop, and Kyle hated how effortlessly beautiful he looked. "Everything okay?" Kyle shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Just processing the wedding? I guess." It was a half-truth. The wedding had been a triumph, but had also cracked something open in him, something he wasn't ready to face. He'd spent years defining himself by his heartbreak over Nate, but Ezra's presence had shifted the narrative, and it scared him. They stopped by a pond, the water reflecting the fiery reds and oranges of the trees. Ezra picked up a pebble, tossing it into the water, the ripples spreading outward. "You know," he said, his tone careful, "that night at the wedding, it didn't feel like just pretending to me." Kyle's breath caught. He wanted to laugh it off, to deflect, but Ezra's eyes pinned him in place. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying," Ezra said, stepping closer, "that I like being your boyfriend. Even if it was fake. And I think maybe you liked it too." The words hung between them, heavy and electric. Kyle's mind raced, torn between fear and longing. He'd spent so long guarding his heart, convincing himself he wasn't ready for love, that he didn't deserve it. But Ezra was standing there, offering something real, and Kyle didn't know how to say yes without breaking. Before he could respond, a voice called out, "Nate." He was jogging toward them, his new wedding band glinting in the sunlight. "Kyle? Ezra," he said, his smile tight. "Didn't expect to see you guys here." The moment shattered. Kyle's walls went up, and Ezra's expression hardened, but his hand found Kyle's, squeezing gently. "Just enjoying the day," Ezra said smoothly, his tone laced with defiance. "Right, babe?" Kyle nodded, his heart pounding. "Yeah." Together, Nate's eyes flickered to their joined hands, and for the first time, Kyle saw uncertainty in his ex's face. They exchanged awkward small talk, but Kyle barely heard it. All he could feel was Ezra's hand, grounding him, and a realization that he didn't want to let go. The encounter with Nate left Kyle rattled, like a fault line had shifted beneath his feet. He and Ezra walked back to Ezra's loft in Williamsburg, the city buzzing around them. But all Kyle could hear was the echo of Ezra's words. "I liked being your boyfriend." They settled on Ezra's couch, a vinyl record spinning softly in the background. But the air between them was thick with unspoken truths. "Okay, talk to me," Ezra said, his voice firm but kind. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his blue eyes locked on Kyle. You've been dodging me since the park. What's going on in that head of yours? Kyle's mouth opened, then closed. He wanted to confess everything. The way Ezra's touch made his heart race. The way he'd started imagining a future that wasn't just pretend. But fear clawed at him, whispering that he'd ruin their friendship, that he'd lose Ezra the way he'd lost Nate. I don't know what I'm doing, Kyle admitted finally, his voice raw. The wedding was supposed to be about showing Nate I'm fine, but now I don't know what's real anymore. Ezra's expression softened, and he reached out, his hand resting on Kyle's knee. Kyle, it's okay to feel something. It doesn't have to be perfect or figured out. But you don't get to hide from it either. The words hit like a wave, washing away Kyle's defenses. He leaned into Ezra's touch, their faces inches apart, and for the first time, he let himself want. Their lips met, tentative at first, then desperate, a collision of longing and fear. It wasn't like the stage kiss at the wedding. This was real, raw, and terrifyingly honest. They pulled apart, breathless, and Ezra laughed softly, his forehead resting against Kyle's. Well, that's one way to answer my question, he said, his voice husky. Kyle smiled, but doubt crept in. What if this is a mistake? What if I mess it up? Then we mess it up together, Ezra said, his thumb tracing Kyle's jaw. But I'm not going anywhere. Weeks passed, and Kyle and Ezra fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. They went on real dates, dive bars in the East Village, art galleries in Chelsea, quiet nights cooking pasta in Kyle's tiny kitchen. But with every laugh, every stolen kiss, Kyle's fear grew. He'd been here before, with Nate, believing in forever only to watch it crumble. What if this was just another illusion? One night, at a rooftop bar overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Ezra caught Kyle staring into his drink, lost in thought. You're doing it again, Ezra said, his tone half teasing, half concerned. That thing where you overthink everything. Kyle sighed, setting his glass down. I'm scared. Easy. I want this us, but what if I'm not enough? What if I ruin it? Ezra's face softened, and he took Kyle's hand, his grip firm. You're enough. Kyle, you've always been enough. The only thing ruining this is you doubting it. The words were a lifeline, but Kyle's past still haunted him. When Nate texted him out of the blue, asking to meet for coffee to catch up, Kyle's resolve wavered. Against his better judgment, he agreed, telling himself it was closure, nothing more. At the cafe, Nate was all charm, his smile as disarming as ever. I'm happy for you, he said, stirring his latte. Then Ezra, it's real, isn't it? Kyle nodded, but Nate's next words cut deep. I'm glad you moved on. I was worried you'd never get over me. The comment stung, reigniting old insecurities. Kyle left the cafe shaken, questioning everything. Was he with Ezra because he loved him, or because he was trying to prove something to Nate? The doubt followed him home, a shadow he couldn't shake. Kyle stood outside Ezra's loft, the November wind biting at his cheeks. He hadn't told Ezra about meeting Nate, and the guilt gnawed at him. He knocked, his heart heavy with the truth he'd been avoiding. He loved Ezra, but he was terrified of what that meant. Ezra opened the door, his face lighting up, but his smile faded when he saw Kyle's expression. What's wrong? He asked, pulling Kyle inside. The words spilled out, Nate's text. the coffee, the doubt it had stirred. Kyle braced for anger, but Ezra just listened, his eyes steady. When Kyle finished, Ezra took a deep breath. "Do you still love him?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "No," Kyle said, the certainty surprising him. "I love you." The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Ezra's face softened, and he pulled Kyle into a fierce embrace. "Then stop running," he whispered. "We're not pretending anymore. This is us." They spent the night talking, unraveling Kyle's fears, rebuilding trust. Ezra shared his own doubts, his fear of being too much, of pushing Kyle away. They laughed, cried, and held each other, the city humming outside. Months later, at a friend's holiday party, Kyle and Ezra stood hand in hand, no longer playing roles. The room buzzed with laughter, but Kyle only saw Ezra, his partner, his home. The wedding, Nate, the past, it was all a distant memory. They'd started as a pretense, but what they'd built was real, a love forged in vulnerability and courage. As they danced, Ezra whispered, "Told you we'd mess it up together." Kyle laughed, his heart full, knowing they'd found something worth keeping.